But nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about that. They all, make a sort of a cartoon out of these countries, and now especially Iran, because our president is so charismatic, like a bad boy who has just broken the neighbor's window and gotten away with it. This constant smile, moving from Anderson Cooper to Charlie Rose, from Charlie Rose to what you would call him, Piers Morgan, even. So he's having a ball, but he gets his thing. But anyway, the point that I'm trying to make is that when I came to this country and I looked the way I do, people would say, but you are not Muslim, you are Western. Why? My grandmother was an Orthodox Muslim who never took her veil off. She was one of the most tolerant and flexible women I have ever met in my life. When the Islamic Republic came into being, she would cry and say, this is not religion. We don't flog girls in order to look like us. Because for her, instinctively, it was an issue of choice. It was an issue that if you turn religion into an instrument of politics, you destroy both politics and religion. That is what is at stake. And we know in this country that when Michelle Bachmann tells you about the gays, that Bible says so, you should remember that it is not just in Iran now, that just 100 years ago, American women didn't have the right to vote. That they were chained to the bars of prisons saying that Bible says that women should stay at home. Bible says that African Americans should remain slaves. They're different from us. This is not new. This doesn't belong to Iran or to Egypt. Every nation, there is not one single nation in this world that is not guilty. We human beings, innocent is just for the books. The whole point is we become heroic when we decide to change, when we look into the mirror and we don't like what we see. And so one of the worst insults, and people have been doing it, people pro-Islamic Republic apologists have been calling, if you like Lolita, you're an Israeli agent. I didn't know Israelis were so much in love with Lolita. But, I was against the war in Iraq, but they accused me of starting the war in Iraq. And I thought that is too powerful. I should not say anything. Because if one woman writes a book and then George W. Bush reads that book, and says, reading Lolita in Tehran, I should go to Iraq and really give it to them. So, but these are the arguments that were brought, and who gives a damn about that? But the whole point is that when you say it is their culture, even in a positive way, you are abdicating your responsibility. Because let's see what this culture was. Iran, I can say the same thing about Egypt. These are ancient cultures. They go to 3,000 years ago. Iran, half of that 3,000 years was not Muslim, it was Zoroastrian. And the Islam in Iran is very different from the Islam in Saudi Arabia or in Turkey. Iranian classical poets that are some of the best in the world. Emerson was in love with Sa'di. Fitzgerald translated Khayyam, the agnostic astrologer poet. Dick Davis now, and Matthew Arnold translated the epic poet Ferdowsi. When you talk about Iranian women copying, Western women, I just want to tell the people, go and read these books that have been translated into English. When you read about Ferdowsi, Iran's epic poet, every Iranian, no matter what religion or background, has a copy of Ferdowsi and Hafiz. Wine in Iranian poetry is a sacred drink. it is a way of communion with God. The women in Ferdowsi not only choose their own husbands, they choose their own lovers. The greatest Iranian hero, Rostam, there's a beautiful miniature of him in Smithsonian where he's sleeping in bed. Usually these heroes, you don't see them sleeping in bed, you see them with their, on their horse with their swords. And this woman is standing at the door of his bedroom, and she says, "My name is Tahmine, and the lust for you has burnt my body." And she sleeps with him for only one night. I can go on and on about Iranian women. I mentioned it in my memoirs, things I've been silent about. At the beginning of last century, at the end of 19th century, Iranian women, Egyptian women, Turkish women, we had some of the most articulate feminists from among them who participated in international conferences, who fought for the rights of women in their countries. Morgan Schuster, an American who was in Iran at that time, in his book, The Strangling of Persia, in 1912, says that the Iranian women, in a period of a few years, have made leaps of centuries. And he said that they are even ahead of their Western sisters. So the point that I'm trying to make is that it is not just us. Iranian women had two ministers, one for ministers for women's affairs in 1970s. Swiss women didn't get their right to vote until 1974. When you look at the history of Western women who are still fighting for their rights, it is a fight. Nothing is written in Bible or in Quran or in Marx's capital. We are the ones who change. And this... Oh, good. Okay, so I want to come back to this country before I finish with it. The whole point about Iran is that we learn a lot from totalitarian societies because of the fact that we become one another's distorted mirrors. We see the extreme of both the best and the worst that we can become. That is why some of the most beautiful and heartbreaking writers and poets of 20th century came from Eastern Europe. And at that time they could come to this country. I don't know if they will ever have a refuge again in this country. People like Joseph Brodsky and Czeslaw Milosz and Brodsky used to say that well, Lenin and Stalin and Mao, they were literate. Mao was even a poet, but he said the problem with them was that their hit list was longer than their reading list. and the whole idea is that when you are in a totalitarian state, with your flesh and blood, you experience the meaning of individual rights, because that is what they target. Whether you're Stalin or Hitler or in a mild form Ayatollah Khomeini, what is your enemy is not weapons. The enemy that they targeted were women, culture, and minorities. Before they had a law, they changed the family protection law that gave women the right to protection both at home and at work. The laws in Iran regarding women, and this was not a right that the Shah gave to the women so that an Ayatollah could take back. Iranian women had fought for these rights for over 100 years. And the first thing that they did was change the laws regarding women. The age of marriage for females in Iran was 18. They changed it from 18 to 9. Something that had never happened in the history of Iran, which was stoning people to death for adultery and prostitution. They implemented that law. And we have the Iranian human rights CEO, or whatever you want to call that guy. He comes on Farid Zakaria and he says, don't criticize us for stoning, it's our culture. Who dares say that Iranian people That is their religion and that's their culture. And everybody says, okay, let's not criticize them. It's their culture. It's the same way that Stalin was attacking Western culture, banning Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, calling them decadent imperialists, Western imperialists. When in Iran, they cut Desdemona from most scenes of Sir Laurence Olivier's Othello, and cut Othello's suicide at the end because they said that the masses will become depressed. Masses don't become depressed when they're stoned to death. You know, you see that Iranian women going to be stoned and saying, well, it's our culture, really. We will do it for our culture. Are they idiots? They're not. They are not. And then you see the same thing happening in Soviet Union. When you read about the culture in Soviet Union, you see that during Stalin's time, they cut the death of swan from Swan's Lake for the same reason that the masses would be depressed.